A quick word of warning before we start. As accessible as I'd like my videos to be, this one is not going to be the case. This video is going to be dealing with a lot of tiny pieces of evidence from across multiple FNAF games, so if you're not familiar with the lore, it might be a bit difficult to follow along. Since I know that this will be the case, and because I'm a smaller channel, I want you to throw me any questions that you have into the comment section below. I'll be doing my best to try and answer as many of them as I can. This video is also a follow-on from my previous video, which should be linked in the description. Since there are a fair amount of things I want to cover in this video, I won't have enough time to repeat everything from the last video, so I would definitely recommend watching that one before watching this one. Let's start with the timeline in my last video. I realise that this timeline does some stuff that most normal timelines don't do, splitting up the FNAF 4 minigame to FNAF 4's gameplay and putting them a few years apart from each other was one of these. I also decided to give the Circus Baby Pizza World and sister location parts a definitive place in the timeline, which is always a bold decision. So, you better strap in, I have to start explaining some things. First, let's go to the boldest decision. FNAF 4. Why would I be so bold as to split up the minigames in the gameplay? My answer is, why the hell not? Apart from Night 5 lining up with the Fredbear Bite minigame and being haunted by Nightmare Fredbear, there isn't much evidence for them existing at the same time. Especially since you consider that the hospital alarm clock that ends every night, along with the Easter eggs of the flowers, pills, and IV bag that can show up on any night, not just after Night 5 and presumably after the bite. What this tells us is that by the time Night 1 rolls around, Crying Child has already been bitten. Splitting them up also helps clean up the timeline a bit. Some of the nightmares have stomach mouths, which ties right back to Circus Baby on her stomach claw. This means that the person we played as in FNAF 4 definitely saw or heard about Baby having a stomach claw. However, we run into an issue, because Baby can't exist until Crying Child dies. Because the Crying Child's death is the catalyst for building Baby, and the other Funtime animatronics. As such, it seems almost impossible for the gameplay elements of FNAF 4 to not take place at least after the closure of Circus Baby's Pizza World. So, when was Circus Baby's Pizza World? Well, Hand Unit tells us, in sister location. He says that Circus Baby's opens after
the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
Now, the earliest that we know of Freddy's is closed down is 1985, after the missing children's incident. As such, due to the stomach mouth, we can put the gameplay of FNAF 4 at least after 1985. Next, let's go to the FNAF 4 Halloween update. For those who weren't aware, not all of the Nightmare animatronics are canon. When Scott released the Halloween update, he let us know that, of the Halloween characters, Nightmare Mangle and Nightmare Puppet are not canon, but that Nightmare Balloon Boy was. This means that FNAF 4 happens to someone who hasn't seen FNAF 2. The way I see it, it simply means that FNAF 2 just isn't open yet. This means that the FNAF 4 gameplay, and Circus Baby's Pizza World, is prior to 1987. Furthermore, something that strikes me as important is that, somehow, this character hasn't seen Nightmare Mangle or Nightmare Puppet. For Michael to be the FNAF 4 child, he must not have seen either of these animatronics. So, let's do the puppet first. As far as I'm aware, the puppet is at 2 locations, the FNAF 2 location and Fredbear's Family Diner. And yet, we don't see it during the FNAF 4 minigames. So, when was it introduced? My best guess is that it was as a response to the Crying Child's death. So, if the puppet was introduced to Fredbear's after Crying Child's death, then Michael cannot go back to the location after he kills his brother. In the last video, I put this down to him being scared of the location after committing manslaughter, because that's the best I've got. If there are any theorists out there with a better answer, I'd love to hear from you. As for now, that's the best I've got. As for Mangle, I'm not sure. I believe that FNAF 2 is Mangle's first location, but yet the evidence of a broken mangled toy on the floor of the girl's bedroom in FNAF 4 minigames is an incredibly strong piece of evidence. This is my best interpretation of it. That's not Mangle. Now, I know that would have made some people pretty confused, but in 1983, I don't think that Mangle existed yet. If you had to ask me, I would say that Mangle was created in 1985 for the missing children's incident. So, now that I've said that, I still have to explain the broken Mangle doll. So, I accept the challenge. I'll try to explain it. But explaining it will cause some major breaks in the timeline, so get ready. Those are multiple toys, with the main one being a Funtime Foxy toy. Now, I understand the issues. I've argued that Circus Babies was open for Elizabeth to get crunched in 1985, but I do believe that Circus Babies was being worked on during 1983. One thing that's throwing me off about the FNAF timeline for a long time is Circus Baby. Sister Location canon suggests that William built the robot himself, but most of the other canon suggests that Henry also had a hand in creating Baby, and I think he did. I think that William and Henry were working on the Sister Location animatronics back in 1983. However, with the death of Crying Child and then Charlie, they became mostly forgotten, until William took them and adjusted them for his twisted plan to resurrect the Crying Child. Some of the animatronics, such as the smaller ones of Balloon Boy and JJ, had already been completed by Henry prior to these deaths, but the main attractions, such as Baby, Funtime Foxy, and Funtime Freddy, were not completed by 1983. This lines up with what we just talked about with the Nightmare animatronics. Michael saw Henry's completed version of Balloon Boy, allowing him to see it in his nightmares. However, the Funtime animatronics hadn't been built, which is why we don't see a Nightmare Ballora or a Nightmare Baby. This also explains why we see the Funtime animatronics in Sister Location, and then meet even more of them in FNAF 6. After the death of Crying Child, William develops a hatred for the designer of Fredbear, Henry, so he basically stops working with it. He takes what he regards as his Funtime animatronics, which is the cast of Sister Location, and puts them into Circus Baby's Pizza World. Henry is then left with the rest, Balloon Boy, JJ, Music Man, and Funtime Chica to name a few. He then reuses these for FNAF 6, rather than building even more new animatronics. What this means is that Circus Baby's Pizza World was going to have a huge roster, even bigger than FNAF 2. But after losing the Sister Location crew, there wasn't enough left to open a restaurant with those alone, especially after losing the titular Circus Baby. This timeline also explains another incredibly random character, Yendo. I'm willing to bet that 60% of you have no idea who Yendo is, and that 95% of you have never heard of Yendo being in a theory before. Yendo was a character in Sister Location Custom Night, and seemed to be an amalgamation of the words Yellow Endoskeleton. Since Golden Freddy was originally referred to as Yellow Bear, and Yendo looks similar to Funtime Freddy, many have suggested this was a Funtime Golden Freddy. I think that that's what Yendo was going to be. However, his casing hadn't been started before the bite. As such, he's never given a casing and put in any of the restaurants. Henry has way too much respect for William to literally remake the suit that killed his kid. And William hated Fredbear and Golden Freddy. He would never make a Funtime Golden Freddy. So there you have it. All that because of one small detail. Who would have guessed that a broken toy caused a significant law change? To finish off Sister Location, I want to explain something I said in the last video, which is that not all of the Sister Location animatronics kidnap children. This ties into what I said earlier about Henry building some of the Funtimes. He obviously wouldn't build animatronics designed to kidnap children. Furthermore, Ballora and Funtime Foxy can't kidnap kids either. When looking at their schematics, it's clear that they don't have the space. As such, Funtime Freddy and Baby are the only kitty-stealing robots. Now that the fun of Sister Location is done, let's turn back to FNAF 4 and the empty girls' room. Why is that room empty? Well, in my last video, I very briefly say that the girl lives with her mum, not William. I believe that the Afton family is completely separated, with the girl living with her mum and Michael and crying child remaining in the custody of William. I believe this to be the case because Elizabeth can't be dead yet by my best estimates, not for another 2 years. Because of this, Elizabeth's room isn't empty because she's dead, it must be empty for some other reason. This also ties together with why Michael has to look after the crying child but never has to look after Elizabeth. Mum isn't around to look after the crying child, and Elizabeth isn't around for Michael to look after. There are 2 different things that allude to this being potentially true. The first is the end of night sister location TV moments named The Immortal and the Restless. While it does reiterate that the baby isn't mine, I want to focus on the fact that the main couple, Vlad and Clara, are separated for the entire show. In fact, whilst they do rekindle their love on the 5th night, you only see that if you complete the fake ending. In the real ending, they never get back together. So, since the undead purple guy is a big stand-in for William, wouldn't it make sense for William to also be separated from his mistress, as the show puts it? Another piece of evidence is the recent FNAF movie trailer. Its canonicity is unknown, and I'd like to go over the movie trailer more in depth closer to the release of the movie, but for now, I want to focus on this shot. Mike, seemingly our Michael stand-in, watching as a car drives away with a younger boy. I'm willing to bet that that younger boy is our crying child in this movie series. Hey, editing JSLM here. While editing this video, I checked the movie's IMDb page and saw that this character is listed as a younger Mike. Since I needed this to be the crying child to prove anything, I was wrong about this being evidence. However, I do still believe that the Afton family is separated, and the Immortal and the Restless is still solid proof of this being the case. Now, finally, I'd like to talk about the FNAF 1 phone call in FNAF 4, because I can explain all sorts of weirdness, but this phone call beat me. I'll explain why. We hear this call in 1993 in FNAF 1. But this doesn't line up with the canonicity of the FNAF 4 Halloween update, which says that the nightmare sequences happened prior to 1987. This is fine because FNAF 1 was open in 1985. Maybe those lines that we hear in FNAF 4 were just recorded when FNAF 1 was open and replayed in 1993 in FNAF 1 to new employees. Except for one problem. Phone Guy dies on night 4 of the FNAF 1 call. Which would be fine until we get to FNAF 2 when Phone Guy is alive and giving us instructions in 1987. Now, sure, these could be pre-recorded lines, except they're not. Phone Guy talks to us about switching us to the day shift and about maybe having to replace us on the night shift at the same time that Jeremy Fitzgerald is switched to the day shift and Michael, under the pseudonym Fritz Smith, does one night of the night shift before being fired. So, we have an issue. Phone Guy has to be alive in 1987, but he has to be dead in 1985 so that we can hear the phone calls in FNAF 4. Do you see the issue here? Now, I have an answer, but it's not a pretty one. It's that some of the FNAF 1 calls were recorded in 1985 and some were recorded in 1993, including the one in which he dies. You see, only the Night 1 phone call plays in FNAF 4. Therefore, Night 1 has to be recorded in 1985. But he could then record his other phone calls at a later date, allowing him to call us live in 1987 and allowing him to also die in 1993. But then why, in Five Nights 1, would you then have those calls lined up to seem like a linear progression when they're nearly a decade apart? Well, I don't know. I suppose you never can really answer everything in a FNAF theory. If you made it to the end of this, well done. I'm genuinely impressed by your capacity to indulge on FNAF lore. If you've got any questions or if you want to discuss any part of this theory, feel free to leave a comment. I'll happily have chats in the comments about theories. And if you're enjoying my FNAF content, remember to leave a like to let me know to make more FNAF theories. Thank you all, and I'll see you all next time.